Thomas Purefoy, thank you very much for taking the time to share with us your memories of your service. When did you go into the Navy and why?
Well, actually, the Navy thing kind of popped up. I grew up in a little small town in South Arkansas, Camden, Arkansas, and there was a huge naval ammunition depot down there during World War II. Still there as an industrial site, and there's still a lot of defense contractors. And as a consequence of that, there was a Navy Reserve unit down there because there were a lot of guys that stayed in Camden and wanted to stay in the reserve. So it was a little Naval Reserve unit there. And my high school coach was the commander. So I'm a fourth generation from Ouachita County, and my father was an attorney. And so in a little small town like that, you always think, well, I can get this fixed. So we all had to, register with the selective service, and we knew we were going to be drafted one day if we didn't go to college. You had a college deferment available 4 years and go to OCS or ROTC or whatever. Well, my father had been in the Army Air Corps. And I think, as I told you, I met one of the pilots for the Doolittle raid lived in my hometown.
Wow. Yeah.
And so they had a reunion there one year. He ran the hotel there, and I met Doolittle and some of those flyers, and I just got fascinated with flying airplanes. So that's what I wanted to do, go in the Air Force. Well, I stumbled pretty strongly on my freshman year, and that set me back a year. And then because of my grades, I was unable to stay in advanced ROTC. Did 2 years. So when 4 years ran out, I got drafted, and I had nowhere to turn except to my coach. And so I went out and joined the Naval Reserve so I could go back to Fayetteville and finish my degree, which I did. Okay. And there was a reserve unit there. So then from there, I applied to OCS and pilot training for the Navy. And I couldn't get into OCS because I flunked the math. And so all these things I believe are providential looking at them. But anyway, that's the way it turned out. So I had a 2-year active duty component. So I left. When I graduated in May of 67, went on active duty in August of 67, went San Diego, had no idea, hadn't done any training whatsoever in the Navy. I'm just a buck seaman. And the big deal was it was about 75 guys, and a lot of them were reservists that I had gone through boot camp a year earlier. And so we were all sitting around, and everyone said, man, some of us going to end up at the Naval Support Activity in Da Nang, and we don't want to do that. Well, there was, out of the 75 in our transit group, 3 of us got orders to Naval Support in Da Nang, me and 2 other guys.
Yeah, you're one of them.
So I had no rate or anything. In the listed ranks, they're called rates. So I just show up, and good news.
You weren't even a boatswain's mate or anything.
Nothing. No.
Yeah.
But I had the college degree, and I had been around in the reserves long enough to know that they put me cleaning barracks. Basically, it's what you do. You either clean or work in the kitchen. And so I went over to the personnel office and found me an officer and got an appointment with him and sat down with him and said, look, I got a college degree. It's a business degree, and I can type, do office work. Surely there's something y'all can do here. And so this little division of the Public Works Department, real estate and contracts, I had my major was real estate. And this had a yeoman billet. Yeomen are the admin guys in the Navy. And it was me and a Lieutenant JG. Well, the billet was actually an E5, E6 billet, and I'm an E3. And so, but they wrangled around, he and my commanding officer and this guy, they figured out a way to put me in the slot. So that's how I ended up there.
So you end up in Da Nang as an E3 in public works. So this is not a combat role.
No,
I'll ask you to tell us about what this work involved. But one of the things it points to, if I was sharing this discussion with students, I would say, look, the The effort in Vietnam, of course, when we talk about it, a lot of the attention is going to be on the guys out on patrol, the air war, things like that. But this is a hugely complicated machine. You've got at one point, more than 500,000, actually, when you were there,
Right.
500,000 in country. And there's just a lot that has to be managed, a lot that has to be organized. And so tell us about what basically did this public works work that you did in the Da Nang area? What basically did that involve?
Well, just let me give you just a brief overview of public works.
Yeah.
There were 10,000 support troops in Da Nang at that time, including the Naval Support Activity, Army, Air Force, etc. So public works was totally responsible for, I'm going to refer to the term I Corps. You probably know what it is, but that's the northern part of South Vietnam at the time.
Right.
So public works was responsible for maintaining electricity grid, building stuff in secure areas and unsecure areas for the Marine Corps primarily. Air Force Base. I was at the Air Force Base 2 or 3 times a week. Now the Marines had a air wing out there, and we did projects with them and did stuff for the Air Force.
Yeah.
And then same thing would apply to all the facilities. If anything, if one of the things that we dealt with in Vietnam, unlike these current wars, the Viet Cong operated at night, and so they would send sappers, these guys that have charges and blow stuff up. But if we had any kind of problem at night, we had to go fix it. So the particular base where it happened would be repaired. In my case, in real estate contracts, part of this whole Vietnam experience was Vietnamization. How can we get the South, build them up so they've got an infrastructure, an army and a navy, et cetera, and an infrastructure to support themselves. Don't get off on how that didn't work like it should have, but that was the idea. So we were pouring money into the locals. And so we had 4 or 5 just basic contractors that would bid on projects. The Marine headquarters was up at Freedom Hill. We had the Air Force Base. You had the Marine Corps helicopter base up at Marble Mountain, and then all these other residual facilities around. I built swimming pools, bowling alleys, buildings, built a bowling alley up at Freedom Hill. And so we would put it out for bid. The contractor would come in. I'd get the plans and specs. That's how I learned the construction business. I'd get the plans and specs, present them to the contractors, and they would give me a bid. And then we present the bid to a committee of officers, and then they would decide what contractor got what.
Now, these are Vietnamese contractors?
All Vietnamese, totally.
All Vietnamese.
And
how could you be sure, or could you be sure, that there weren't Viet Cong or Viet Cong sympathizers doing the work? Was there any way to be sure of that?
Well, you in terms of the workers, you could never know for sure. In fact, there's always these stories. We had a project up at Dong Ha, which is up on the DMZ for the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And we all kind of laughed, and we'd send out CB inspectors when we did that would do the people that owned the contracting companies were all well vetted, and they hated communism, and they would do anything to eradicate it. And then the crews were managed by the men, and then the women ran the business. A lot of these women, very smart women, and they knew how to run their businesses. But yes, if they got up in Dong Ha, they got attacked one night, and as our inspector said, well, the bricklayer, whatever his name was, we found him in the wire the next morning after the attack. So he had been in there working all day. So yeah, that was a problem, but it wasn't a huge problem.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was.
Yeah, I've heard that kind of story before. The really nice guy who's cutting hair by day on the base, the barber, ends up being a sapper that comes down later on. You had a lot of interactions then with Vietnamese.
Yes.
My understanding is you're working with translators, you're working with the contractors. You're there from October 67 to October 68. Of course, Tet hits, right there in January 68. And then what follows is, in terms of combat, in terms of U.S. casualties, the toughest part of the war. So you're there at a pretty intense time.
Yeah.
How would you describe, relationship with the Vietnamese you interacted with? Did you get to a place where you felt like the folks you were interacting with the most, you could trust them without question?
Oh yeah, without question. Now, and we dealt really with the people that ran these little businesses. Now, after Tet, the security for Da Nang was primarily with the ARVN Army, the Republic of Vietnam Army.
Yeah.
And we rented an office building there. It was a house that we had redone. Mm-hmm. And we had 2 ARVN soldiers on the fence around it, and 2 ARVN soldiers. Well, after Tet, we started putting Marines out there. So Marine MPs became our guards after that. There was you may have in your discussions heard the word MACV, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, which was basically run by the Army, but it was all the services were involved.
Yeah.
So there was a Civic Action Building about 3 blocks down the street from us that interacted with a lot of Vietnamese, and just on a regular basis. And some woman came in there one day to do business with her briefcase and left her briefcase. And when she left, it exploded.
Wow.
Didn't kill anybody, but it blew the legs off of this Marine that she was interacting with at his desk and wounded a lot of people. So security became a lot tighter. And then on the 23rd of January, before Tet, we had another problem. We had the Pueblo incident. Now, most people don't think too much about that, but for us, that was very serious because I had to stand watch every 7 days. So I had a secret clearance, and we'd get all these messages. And so they were counting sailors and ships and Marines because there was some indication we might end up in a war with Korea at the same time. So that got very tense. Really? But we had Marines on our compound, and the sappers were very careful not to blow up American facilities. The whole political thing with Ho Chi Minh and Giap, who was the general, don't stick a sharp stick in the Americans' eye because we don't want to make them any madder than they're already mad. And so they would blow up Vietnamese facilities, primarily police stations and things like that. And that became fairly frequent. I got involved in the only really combat situation. We had a friendly fire accident in our office one night and almost killed one of the Marines. Wow. One of my contractor guys was down. They have to come in every 30 days from the field, and he was down there that night when I had the watch. And about midnight, we had a sapper attack down the street, and the Vietnamese Army, they would shoot up. That big scare was they would shoot up and down the street. So you'd hear automatic weapons fire, and you're not sure. I'd been in country 10 months, so I'm getting ready to go home. And I remember, and I had protocols. I carried a pistol mostly. We had other weapons, but I carried a pistol most of the time. And so the protocol was that one of the guards would come in and give us a brief on what's going on. And because if I needed to call a captain or something to take care of some battle damage, that they would go do it. So he comes in the door. As he's coming in the door, unbeknownst to me, this Inspector CB has an automatic weapon with him in his briefcase. Wow. And he panicked. And the lights were out. I wasn't worried. I mean, I'd done this before. And so when he opened the door, he opened fire on him. And the good news was he hadn't shot this. It was a 45 caliber old World War II style burp gun. But the kick, the MP only took one bullet, went through his hand right here where he was carrying his M16, split and went in his leg.
Wow.
And we found the rest of the bullets the next morning in the ceiling, the wall and ceiling. But But as he's falling, he says, they're coming down the street. They're coming down the street. And I went, well, doo-doo. I wasn't expecting this late in my tour, but they weren't. Turns out it wasn't a big deal.
The MP said that? The MP said they're coming?
The MP says he's going down. Well, the Arvins were shooting up and down the street. And
right.
that's what he thought. So,
yeah, so the CB thought some huge firefight was going on, and
yeah, he just panicked.
And he
the guy opened the door and he unleashed on him.
I want to just ask you about a couple of things. So you said that after Tet, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the Arvin forces that had been the guards around Da Nang, they were replaced by Marines. Was that because of a certain loss of confidence in Arvin performance during Tet?
Oh, probably some of that. We all didn't have a great deal of confidence in the Arvins that we were around.
Yeah.
Now, I've known buddies that were in the Marine Corps and Army, just guys that had a great deal of confidence in the ones they served with in these outposts. But I suspect, and I interacted with our Arvid guards frequently, they were probably either recruits or I did not count them as heavy combat troops, but
right,
that was part of it. But I think it was really more for security. You didn't know for sure, whether they were sympathizers or not.
Right.
So you just didn't want to get in that kind of environment. And, so it just
right. I mean, there might be infiltrators, in Arvin uniforms and that. And then if you could, I hadn't heard this before, Pueblo, as you say, the Pueblo incident, the North Korean capturing of this U.S. Navy ship off the coast of North Korea, still on display in Pyongyang. The USS Pueblo is still on display in Pyongyang. That incident takes place right around the time of Tet, very, very close.
Well, I looked it up, and it was Tet was 30 January 68, and Pueblo was 23 January 68. So it was a week before Tet.
Yeah.
And of course, Tet just created another total problem there. But yeah, it was we kind of laughed. We thought, golly, we like it here. We don't want to go to Korea.
Wow.
Don't send us there.
But the Pueblo incident did kind of you began the process of perhaps preparing to ship out, send some sailors off to
no question.
North Korea.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really very, don't use the word insecure, but it was a little troubling to all of us, and it's particularly troubling to the officers, and for ships' movements in that part of the South China Sea was headquartered in Da Nang. So those guys were, and there were a lot of ships that were docked out in the bay. And of course, you got Yankee Station and all those ships, carriers, et cetera. And so, yeah, it was a real difficult.
Yeah, wow. And then just one other thing, and I want to come to Tet. I've talked to Navy CBs before, and in working in I Corps around Da Nang, and they say something like, we'd build a bridge, the VC would blow it up, we'd rebuild it, they'd blow it up, we'd rebuild it, they'd blow it up, and it'd kind of go back, back and forth like that. Does that fit with your experience?
No, we didn't have. There were only two bridges across the Sancha River, and it was guarded by the SEALs during Tet. Now Tet, and I'll get back to that in a second, but we had an old railroad bridge that we'd paved over, and then we built a bridge. We didn't build it. It was there when I got there, but it was actually built in San Francisco and floated to Da Nang by Brown and Root Construction, which was owned by Lady Bird Johnson, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
But the day of Tet, we worked from 6 to 6 every day. And where I lived at Camp Tenshaw was 6 or 7 miles out there. You've been there, so you kind of know where that is.
Yeah.
So we drive into town, and it was about 5:30. We're crossing the bridge. Sun's just coming up, and we see there was a helicopter pad right there by the bridges. and we see several gunships operate, and we thought, what is this? We've been getting messages that something was coming, but Da Nang got caught off guard. And so as we're crossing the bridge, there are guys down there, and we're not carrying any weapons that day, because a lot of days we just didn't do it. First of all, it's heavy.
Well, and it was a holiday, and there was supposed to be a truce, right, for the holiday.
That's correct. So, and this is on a Tuesday when this happened. I looked it up. So these guys are waving us off the bridge, and instead of turning around and going back, we carried on, and we had to abandon our truck and just lay in a kind of a ditch until they clean this village out. Well, the Vietnamese, the Marines or the Army helicopters, and they were supported by the ARVN troops. When they killed, this is the first time I've really saw dead bodies. When they killed VC, they left them out on the street for 10 days. So there were 10 bodies that laid by that helicopter pad every day you drive by it for 10 days to display that they meant business.
To the locals who sympathized with the VC, that was the point, to send a message?
Well, actually for Tet, if you study the Tet Offensive, Da Nang had been a primary target. But if you'll remember, the Battle of Hue kind of slowed it down. So they never really got to Da Nang. Da Nang was not very secure. You talked about things on the base where there was no base. There was an air base that was pretty secure. Then I lived out at Camp Tenshaw, and that was relatively secure, but not really. It was at the base of Monkey Mountain, and we'd get sniper fire and stuff like that in there, but it wasn't anything major.
Yeah.
And we had some Marines and some Special Forces out there. In fact, we had the Korean Special Forces lived out there as well.
Really?
But most of our work was just out and about.
So pretty secure then. So you described, a little bit of early Tet Offensive, these big Hung bodies left out for 10 days. What other things come to mind when you remember the Tet Offensive?
Well, for us, after a few days, we just back going to work. It was a high security issue probably for a month, 6 weeks, and then it kind of settled back down to normal.
Yeah.
Once they kind of the Battle of Hue. I can't remember how long the Battle of Hue was, but once that got over and they got once it all settled kind of back down to where you were, but now
I mean, I think what your comments are pointing to is, as dramatic as Tet was through most of South Vietnam, it's over. I mean, the intensity of it is over pretty quickly, except for Hue. It goes on in Hue for about a month, I think.
Yeah, and Hue, and then you had Khe Sanh going on. Then that was a major battle.
Right.
And I guess one of the things that happened after Tet, several of us decided we probably need to be going to chapel. So we started, three of us started going to chapel.
Oh.
And the chaplain said, look, you had Dong Ha, you had Khe Sanh, and there were a couple of other outposts were getting hit pretty hard and lots of wounded. So we were typically off on Sundays. So we would go, me and another fellow would go out to the Navy hospital there where they were bringing in the wounded and help the corpsmen triage. And that was very eye-opening. I mean, you see some pretty rough stuff. Bringing helicopter, and they had a difficult time getting soldiers out of Khe Sanh because they were getting blasted,
bombarded.
Yeah, and I knew some guys that were at Khe Sanh that didn't make it. So some Marines. So, but that was one of the things that kind of kept it alive for some of us is the wounded. And again, the security was a lot higher from that point on.
Yeah. Do you know the names of those Marines at Khe Sanh?
No, I can't remember. These were guys that they weren't my friends. They were, they were just guys I'd met along. One guy was a nephew of a chief petty officer that I worked with, and we'd drink some beer with him, and he told us he'd come out on R&R. He said, when I get back, I'm done. And he just killed 2 weeks later.
Yeah. So these are guys you knew there, but you weren't close.
Right. No. I had a close friend that was in the Navy that was killed in Saigon, in Camden.
What was his name?
His name was Gerald Hamm, Hamm. And he was killed kind of as a random, he was on LST, and they'd moved it from Da Nang down to, and I didn't find this out till I got home. It happened right after I got home. In fact, I had to go with him to tell his mother. And that was kind of hard. They asked me to go with him to tell his mother when he died. I'd been home maybe 3 weeks when it happened.
You went with the chaplain to tell his mother?
Mm-hmm. They sent some. The commanding officer, I don't know whether he was there or not. I can't remember who all, but it was an officer and probably a chaplain that went to tell her from the Navy's reserve unit there in Camden.
Did you say anything to Gerald's mom, or were you there just as
well? The sad thing is that somebody called me when I got home and said that Gerald was in Vietnam on LST, and he'd been in Da Nang. Well, I went to the LST ramp in Da Nang frequently. It's where we unloaded supplies and stuff. In fact, I sent you some pictures. I think was probably close to that ramp. Very secure, very safe. Never had any problems there. But unbeknownst to me, so I went to see her 2 weeks before he was killed, and told her, I said, I think Gerald's fine. I said, I didn't see him, but I know the boat, I know the ramp. Well, what happened is they transferred his ship from Da Nang to Saigon. And when they got to Saigon, there were some random mines as they were getting ready to set up on a ramp that the boat hit. And just blew. He was down in the hole, down, killed him. Then I had to go back, and when they told her that he was dead. So that was kind of hard.
You mentioned that you were in the proximity with the Korean forces as well. Did you have any interaction with the Korean forces?
Not that much. No, there was what they refer to as Tiger Marines.
Right. Yeah.
And was kind of interesting. And back in '68, you didn't see much camouflage. The Marines when we wore the same thing as the Marines did. We all wore, olive drab dungarees. We wore the same uniforms they did.
Yeah.
Special Forces had some camouflage, but all of the Korean Marines wore camouflage, and they had set up because they were right there at Camp Tenshaw, you could go take, I guess it's jujitsu or one of those martial arts courses, but you'd see them, they would work a lot at night, and you would see them form up. You're too young to know this, but there used to be an old World War II TV show called The Rat Patrol, and showed these Jeeps with 50 caliber machine guns on them. And that's what they traveled in. Yeah. So you'd see them form up out there at the gate, and they were going out but when things were tough, they sent them in because they were very serious about communism. And I understood that those guys were, in fact, it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
When my wife was diagnosed with cancer, her radiologist had been a doctor for the Korean Marines. He wasn't there. So he was familiar. He'd been at that base where I was. This is kind of an interesting.
Yeah. I've heard, from everyone I've talked to who had any interaction with the Korean Tiger Force there in Vietnam, I've heard that they were extremely tough.
Very.
Yeah.
They didn't mess around.
Yeah. So you arrive in Da Nang in '67. You leave Da Nang or that area in '68. Now you actually did some work in downtown Da Nang, right?
That's where my office was. Oh yeah.
So your office is downtown.
I'm right in the middle. It's not that street anymore. I've looked it up on the map. It's 7 Yen Bay. It's about 3 blocks from the river.
So what was it like? I mean, downtown Da Nang, if you just wanted to leave the office and go out by yourself, was that okay?
Oh no, I walked the streets all the time. In the daytime, it wasn't a problem.
Really?
I mean, the only time that we had to be careful, and when I had the watch, every 7 days I had the watch. You'd go to the message center, which was at the White Elephant on the river down there, about 3 blocks from where we were. And you had to make your message runs every 4 hours. So you make the first one at 8, 12, and then 4 in the morning, 8 in the morning. And those dark ones are walking that street at night. I always kept my pistol loaded. They have little dim street lights. But yeah, no, during the day, and I had a driver's license and I was out and about. So I had a pickup truck. And I think I sent you a picture of my friend, Steve Catellis, the oldest man in the Navy.
Yeah.
I don't know what he was doing, but he was collecting shoes for the orphans, and I became his driver.
Oh, really? You were his driver?
I knew the city very well. If I went over there today with you, I wouldn't have any problem getting around that downtown area.
Wow.
I was up and down all those streets.
And was that true after Tet as well as before?
Yeah.
Wow.
After, but during the day, that night,
During the day.
they did a few things. For example, see, all the officers live downtown. The guys out on Camp Tenshaw were all, maybe with a few, were all enlisted guys. But most of all the officers lived downtown. They had one of the most famous officers club in the world there called the Stone Elephant.
Some veterans say when they came home, they went through San Diego, they went through Oakland and had to deal with protesters and things like that, comments. How about you? When you came home from Vietnam, did you see any of that kind of thing yourself, sort of that anti-war stuff?
No, and what was really a little bit hard, because I think I told you, I'd gotten married on R&R in Honolulu 5 months into my tour. That's a different, total crazy story, but it's a sweet story too. When I came home, I left Da Nang on a troop transport. We landed at Norton Air Force Base, went to Okinawa,
California,
at Norton Air Force Base.
Yeah.
And took the bus over to LAX, got a ticket. My wife at the time she was graduating. She was working for a hospital over in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I bought a ticket to Tulsa, Oklahoma. I mean, I didn't go anywhere. And the Navy operates a little differently than Army and Marine Corps. They operate in units. Navy doesn't operate in a unit. It's all individual jobs for the most part. Now, the Seabees do have construction battalions, but I wasn't in one of those. I was just assigned. I was a yeoman assigned to the Public Works, which was run by the Seabees.
Right. Yeah.
And I had a CB rate too. I ended up with a CB rate and a yeoman rate when it was all said and done. But that was bad. That was a bad transition because you've been gone for a year. I didn't see any particular protests. I had some encounters when I moved to Little Rock with people that made various comments about it, but I just kind of brushed it off because I'm married and trying to get on with my life. So I came straight home, 58 hours travel time.
Wow.
And then you're back I was home for 30 days and then I moved, transferred to Memphis for about a month and got out. Psychologically, it would have been better for everybody to at least have a week or two at a camp or somewhere to get reoriented back to life, because you've lost a year of
right.
time. A lot happens in a year.
Yeah.
And I told people before and the same thing today. That's a difficult transition, particularly if you've been in combat and seen a lot of. I was not, but even so,
right.
You were disoriented.
You used the word earlier, Vietnamization, and the goal, of course, the goal never was for the United States to make a colony out of South Vietnam. The goal always was to help that country to become independent. That's what Vietnamization was all about. By the time you left in October 68, if somebody, if the first question to you after you arrived in the States, you land in Norton Air Force Base, and then the first question somebody asks you is, so do you think that the South Vietnamese will be able to, sustain their own country? What would you have said? After a year there, working a lot with the Vietnamese, you said you most of the ones or all of the ones you worked with closely. But after that year, did you feel confident that South Vietnam would be able to stand on its own?
Yes, but I didn't know. Of course, back in those days, I didn't understand all of the geopolitical forces that were involved in that. But in terms of watching them interact and with their attitude and what we were doing to train them, I felt very confident that it could have come about. They had a Navy. We were giving them boats and some small ships, and we were training. They were flying airplanes. So I think had we had not screwed it up years later and cut the money off, I think they would have had a potential chance. But in looking back on it and understanding the involvement of the Russians, et cetera, I look back and see now it wasn't going to happen, you know. And if you look at the history of North Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh and the French and all that, and you study all that, then you realize it could have been done had we destroyed their will to make war, and we never did that because we stayed away from it. And the reason we did, in this summit I was telling you about, one of the guys that worked for Johnson said he was scared to death of getting in a war with the Russians. And so we played a little bit, I'm going to use a word footsie here, but we do that sometimes instead of going and dealing with where we were. And plus Asia was a new place for us. That was all new. And it made it that much more difficult. But the Vietnamese had the will, the South Vietnamese had the will.
Yeah.
But then they had their own political, you know, it wasn't a democracy. It was not ever going to be, you know.
Yeah.
But I think so. I think they had the confidence that they could have done it if we'd at least continued to pay a little money to them.
Yeah. So are you among those then who feel that, you know, when South Vietnam came under attack 70 in the mid 70s, 74, 75 in Saigon Falls in 75, it sounds like you're among those who feel like the U.S., you know, left an ally in the lurch, that we should have come to their assistance at that time rather than let them be overrun by the North.
Yeah, there's no question. And I got plenty of close friends, and I guess from my perspective personally, I wonder, you know, Mr. Ten was my instructor. Did he get out? And Mrs. Ten, who had children, I'd go to birthday parties for her children. Did she get out? You know, so you kind of felt like those of us that had relationships like that felt like, well, golly, these poor people, we just left. And if you look at the history of it, the communists jailed, killed. I mean, over the course of the next 10 years, there were like 50-something thousand South Vietnamese that were executed. I had a postman here in Little Rock it's in the Vietnamese. He was about my age, and he was in the Army. And he got out. Well, he said he was there. They imprisoned him for several years, and then they put him in a retraining camp, and then he finally wrangled away and got his way out. And he was a postman here in the United States.
Wow.
Mr. Nguyen. And so, yes, I hate it that we didn't do more to, because they were neat people. I remember Christmas 67. They had this lady, kind of like Japan did. They called her Hanoi Hannah. And when we were at the EM Enlisted Men's Club drinking beer, they would pipe her radio messages. And she was talking about Ho Chi Minh coming to Camp Tenshaw and having Christmas lunch with the Navy. Well, there was another rumor going around that the Russians had provided them with helicopters. Now, that would have been a whole different combat story if they'd have had an Air Force and done that. So that was all. It was just kind of an interesting side story.
I've never heard anyone say that Hanoi Hannah was effective in scaring anybody.
No, we laughed.
Yeah, that's what I.
She didn't scare anybody.
That's what I've heard.
And we were pretty confident too as soldiers, quite frankly. And people would say we all weren't very well trained, but I was very well trained. I went to Marine Corps weapons training, went to survival school, and knew a little bit of the language. I couldn't tell you what it is now, but yeah. So I felt, for what I was doing, felt very well trained and could handle any emergency if we had to do it.
Sure.
And was willing to.
What does Vietnam mean to you today when you look back on that war? You look back on your time there. What does it mean to you today?
Well, Preston, I think life circumstances train us. It's a test for us to live out life. Now, I'm a Christian, and I believe God's providence falls into everything. And my first wife used to say, had you not flunked your freshman year, you'd have probably been killed as a pilot. But as it turns out, you ended up, and got home, and we had a wonderful 41 years. I got a son and a daughter. My son went in the Navy, now he did it right. He went to Vanderbilt on a Navy scholarship and was in the amphibious thing. So Vietnam is just another chapter of experience. But frequently I'll look at, when I'm in a tough spot, I'll think about, you know what, God got me through this environment over there. At times I could have been killed. I mean, there are plenty of opportunities for getting in trouble. And I was driving around the countryside by myself in a gray Navy pickup truck. I think about that sometimes, and it kind of scares me when I'm going up to Freedom Hill and with nothing but, as I felt like Barney Fife, nothing but a 45 and 2 clips. But that's an experience in life that I use frequently and say, you know what, we did this, we can do that. So I guess the thing that I feel the hardest about is that we left them. We just left them. When I talked to my wife and I were down in Gulf Shores, and I went down on the pier one morning to take pictures of the sunrise, and there was an old Vietnamese man there fishing. And he had the same story my mailman did. He had been put in jail. He had been in the Army. And I told him, I said, I'm sorry. He said, no worries. I'm here now. I hate communism. Communism is an evil disease, and we don't take it seriously. We're not taking it seriously now. And when you study history and when it started, we have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, I agree.
In my opinion.
I agree. Well, Mr. Purifoy, I really appreciate you sharing these memories and for allowing them to become part of the record that others can learn from. It's a very big and complicated war over there, and you played a little role in it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. When I talk to veterans and they'll say, golly, man, you went to Vietnam. I said, let me tell you something. Are you a veteran? You went in, you did your job. You could have gone here, there, or yon. And so I felt very strongly. I'd do it again. I believe in our military, and we need to support them.